The untamed wild can strike without warning, transforming serene moments into frantic battles for survival. From the Petrov family's terrifying clash with a massive Russian grizzly in Ussuri-Krai's misty forests, to a chilling backcountry standoff against a polar bear in northern Norway's frozen fjords, in this video you'll witness 6 pulse-pounding tales of bear attacks on humans, where every decision, movement, and second counts. On October 7, 2025, the Petrov family drove through the dense wilderness of Ussuri-Krai, where thick forests pressed close to the narrow road, and the damp air carried the faint scent of pine and decay. Sergei Petrov gripped the steering wheel tightly as the SUV rumbled over the uneven asphalt, his wife Natalia watching the endless green blur past her window. In the back seat, their teenage son, Mikhail, scrolled through his phone while little Anya leaned against the glass, her tired eyes tracing the shifting shapes of trees. The afternoon sky was pale and heavy with clouds, and a light drizzle began to fall, streaking the windshield in thin ribbons that the wipers struggled to clear. They had been driving for hours, and when a small roadside cafe appeared ahead, its sign faded, lights dim, and mist curling around its roof, Sergei decided to stop so they could rest before continuing toward Vladivostok. The cafe was quiet and weathered, its parking lot empty except for an old truck that looked abandoned. The surrounding forest felt oppressively close, damp and silent, its thick undergrowth capable of hiding almost anything. The family stepped out to stretch and breathe in the cold air, unaware that something massive and hungry had already caught their scent. Deep within the trees, a large grizzly bear, an enormous male in its prime, weighing close to 600 kilograms, was foraging for berries and carcasses. The shortening days had left it restless, its instincts driving it to eat constantly before winter. The faint odor of cooked food from the cafe, mixed with the scent of people, drew the animal closer through the ferns and birch trunks, its movements silent and deliberate. Inside the cafe, the Petrovs bought bottled drinks and snacks, staying only a few minutes before heading back to their SUV. By then, the drizzle had become a steady rain. The forest beyond the parking lot seemed to shift subtly, as if the shadows themselves were alive. When Sergei opened the driver's door, he heard a faint rustle from the woods, but dismissed it as the wind. As Natalia lifted Anya into the car, a low, guttural sound rolled through the darkness. The bear emerged from the tree line, shoulders rippling beneath its wet fur, dark muzzle lifted as it sniffed the air. It moved with startling speed, crossing the gravel in seconds, its heavy paws sinking deep into the mud. Sergei hurried everyone inside the vehicle, slamming the doors just as the bear reached the front. The sudden impact of its body shook the SUV, followed by the screech of claws scraping against metal. The grizzly reared up, towering over the windshield, its massive chest pressed against the glass as it tested the barrier. The sound of its breath, hot, rhythmic, and animal, filled the cabin. With a single strike, it dented the hood and cracked the windshield, shards scattering across the dashboard. Anya began to cry, clinging to her father, while Mikhail tried to pull his mother back as she instinctively reached toward him. The bear circled the SUV, enraged and confused, its power magnified by hunger and fear. It slammed its body against the doors, rocking the entire vehicle as if it were weightless. Sergei fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling, the growl of the beast drowning out every sound. Natalia gripped Mikhail's arm, holding him close as the bear rose again and struck the rear window. The glass shattered, spraying fragments across the back seats. In the chaos, Mikhail was dragged halfway through the opening, his cry lost in the storm and the roar of the animal. Sergei lunged to grab him, but the bear's head filled the gap, teeth snapping, claws raking through fabric and skin with terrible precision. Realizing the rear was no longer safe, Sergei wrenched open the front door, pulled Anya by the arm, and dragged her into the rain. The forest loomed around them, black and endless, but escape was all he could think of. Behind him, Natalia tried to shield Mikhail, placing herself between him and the animal, but the bear's strength was unstoppable. It forced its way deeper into the SUV, tearing through the interior as the frame groaned under its weight. Sergei stumbled toward the road, clutching Anya to his chest, his heart pounding, lungs burning, unable to look back. The sounds behind him, metal twisting, glass breaking, screams merging with the wind, cut through the rain until they faded into silence. When the first local responders arrived, guided by a truck driver who had spotted the wrecked vehicle from afar, the scene was hauntingly still. The SUV sat tilted at the edge of the gravel lot, its windows shattered and its body warped by immense force. The bear had disappeared into the trees, leaving only muddy paw prints the size of plates and streaks of blood on the ground. Inside, Natalia and Mikhail were found lifeless, the deep gashes and torn metal telling the story of what had happened. Sergei and Anya were discovered farther down the road, soaked, trembling, and speechless, unable to respond for several minutes. The investigation that followed concluded that the bear had likely been drawn by the smell of discarded food from the cafe's bins, later intensified by the scent from the family's snacks. Wildlife experts explained that in October, grizzlies in the Far East become unpredictable and increasingly bold as they prepare for hibernation, often venturing near human areas in search of easy meals. Authorities sealed off the site and issued warnings for travelers to avoid stopping near forest edges, especially during late autumn. In the weeks that followed, Sergei and Anya returned to Vladivostok. Their lives permanently changed. They spoke publicly only once, urging others never to underestimate how quickly danger can appear in the wild. The memory of that night, the rain, the shattered glass, the sound of claws raking against steel, remained with them. The road through Ussuri Krai stayed quiet after that, bordered by the same endless forest that had once hidden the predator. A reminder that even a brief pause in the wrong place can summon something ancient and unstoppable from the dark. On October 12, 2025, Daniel Harris, a seasoned hunter of 38 years, stayed alone in a remote cabin deep within the rugged wilderness of western Colorado, miles from the nearest road and surrounded by towering pines, dusted with the first snow of late autumn. The trees stood slick with frost, their needles shining faintly in the cold light, and the air outside was sharp and brittle against the skin. He had spent the day trudging through frozen brush, tracking mule deer and checking his traps, his boots stiff with cold and exhaustion pressing on every joint. By nightfall, he welcomed the solitude and the quiet crackle of the wood stove, whose glow painted flickering shadows across the modest interior. The cabin was sparsely furnished, with a single bed, a workbench, a heavy wooden table, and a neatly stacked woodpile beside the wall. It contained everything a late-season hunter needed: canned goods, dried meat, and game he had processed and stored from previous trips. Too tired to secure the door properly, Daniel left it slightly ajar, unaware that the crisp night air carried the scent of meat far into the forest, an invisible trail that could draw in any foraging predator nearby. Around 2 in the morning, Daniel awoke to a rhythmic thudding and scratching against the cabin's front entrance, the sound growing louder until it vibrated through the floorboards. At first, he thought it might be a branch or the wind, but the irregular intensity made him sit upright instantly, instincts honed by years of hunting in bear country. Then the smell reached him, musky, earthy, and unmistakable, mixed with the metallic tang of the dried meat hanging nearby. A black bear, opportunistic and hungry, had followed the scent to the open door and slipped silently inside, its dark eyes reflecting the dim firelight as it stepped onto the worn floorboards. Daniel's pulse quickened. He grabbed the nearest object, a metal cooking pot, and braced for what he knew could turn violent. The bear lunged suddenly, a blur of black muscle and power. A massive paw struck his shoulder, hurling him to the floor with bone-jarring force. Pain flared through his arm, and he felt claws tear at his jacket, slicing shallow cuts into the skin beneath. Adrenaline flooded his body, sharpening every movement as he rolled aside, narrowly avoiding the creature's snapping jaws that closed on the space where his head had just been. Desperation took over. He scrambled behind the heavy wooden table, using it as a shield, and slammed the pot against its edge, producing a harsh metallic clang that echoed through the cabin. The bear hesitated, nostrils flaring, confused by the sudden burst of noise. Its massive paw struck at the table, testing the obstacle, claws gouging deep grooves into the surface. Daniel held his ground, gripping the pot so tightly his knuckles went white, striking again and again to create a wall of sound meant to startle and disorient the animal. The minutes that followed dragged endlessly. The black bear circled the room, grunting and sniffing, investigating every corner in search of food. Its breath came out in heavy bursts that fogged the air, thick with the smell of musk and wet fur. Daniel's muscles burned with tension, and his hands stung from cuts, but he knew that panicking or running could trigger a fatal response. He stayed crouched, controlling his movements, keeping the animal's attention on the clanging noise that it couldn't quite understand. At one point, the bear lunged again, its full weight slamming into the table and shaking the floorboards beneath him. The impact sent splinters flying, forcing Daniel to brace his body against the edge to keep from toppling over. Startled by the resistance and the piercing noise, the bear paused, ears flattening, uncertain whether to continue its assault. Sensing hesitation, Daniel raised the pot once more and struck it hard against the table, sending a deafening ring through the cramped space. The echo ricocheted off the wooden walls, loud enough to make the animal recoil a step. The bear watched him with wary eyes, its intelligence warring with instinct, as if deciding whether this defiant human was prey or something too unpredictable to challenge. After another tense moment, the bear, unnerved by the relentless noise and erratic movement, began to back away. It sniffed once more at the air, hesitated at the doorway, then turned sharply and disappeared into the night. The forest swallowed it whole, leaving only silence and the faint sound of wind threading through the pines. Daniel collapsed onto the floor, trembling violently, sweat mixing with blood from the cuts on his arms. His shoulder throbbed where the claws had raked through muscle. For several minutes, he remained still, listening to the empty quiet and the low crackle of the dying fire, making sure the bear was truly gone. When he finally rose, leaning heavily on the table, his legs shook from both exhaustion and relief. He patched himself as best he could, wrapping strips of cloth around the cuts and cleaning the wounds with antiseptic from his pack. The cabin bore signs of the struggle, claw marks gouged across the doorframe, the table scarred, the floor scuffed and splintered. The air still carried the wild scent of the bear, sharp and primal. Daniel knew how close he had come to disaster. He mentally noted every mistake: the unsecured door, the exposed food, and his lapse in vigilance that had invited danger inside. Wildlife experts would later explain that black bears are naturally curious and often investigate human shelters when food odors are present. Such encounters, while terrifying, are usually survivable when the person reacts quickly, stays loud, and holds a defensive position instead of fleeing. By sunrise, Daniel had regained some composure, though his body ached from the night's ordeal. Outside, the forest seemed calm again, snow catching the pale light of dawn. Yet the memory of what had happened lingered, the echo of claws on wood, the thunder of the bear's breath, the primal awareness that even experience could not fully protect him from nature's unpredictability. He stepped outside briefly, scanning the edge of the forest for any sign of the animal. Only the faintest paw prints remained in the snow, already softening under the morning light. The wilderness had returned to silence, but the cabin, the scars on his skin, and the memory of that night would remain as reminders that survival in the wild depends as much on respect as on strength. In late August of 2024, Lucas Grant, a 34-year-old mountaineer and photographer, crested a narrow glacier pass on Kodiak Island. His boots crunched over the icy terrain as he adjusted the camera strapped to his chest, framing shots of rare alpine ice formations. Thick fog blanketed the slopes, reducing visibility to only a few meters, and the wind whispered through jagged spires of ice, carrying the sharp scent of melting snow mixed with faint traces of sea salt. Hours passed as he crouched to capture intricate frozen patterns, unaware that a massive predator had already detected his presence, drawn by the faint aroma of food packed in his backpack. A subtle shift in the snow alerted him, a low, wet crunch beneath enormous paws. When he looked up, a Kodiak bear emerged from behind a ridge, moving with deliberate precision that carried both weight and grace. Its dark eyes locked on him, unblinking and assessing. Lucas froze, planting his ice axe into the ice before him, gripping it as both anchor and shield while trying to steady the rush of his heartbeat. The bear's broad shoulders rippled beneath wet fur as it advanced through the fog, sniffing the air and gauging his movements, each step pressing deep, heavy impressions into the snow. The bear lunged suddenly. A single paw struck his shoulder with bone-jarring force, sending him sliding several feet across the jagged ice. His forearm scraped painfully along the ridges, and a flash of pain shot through him, sharp and immediate. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself upright, planting his boots firmly and using the ice axe to regain balance and keep the animal in sight. The bear began to circle, drawn toward the faint scent of his backpack. It sniffed and swiped at the air, but did not immediately strike again, moving with a strange, testing curiosity that kept him suspended between fear and awe. Minutes passed in a slow, stretching silence, broken only by the crunch of ice and the sound of the bear's breathing. Lucas stood motionless except for the subtle adjustments that kept his footing secure. Every instinct urged him to flee, yet his experience told him otherwise. Sudden movement could trigger a fatal reaction. His shoulder throbbed from the impact, the scrape along his forearm burning in the cold air, but his focus remained razor-sharp. He avoided locking eyes with the bear, watching instead through peripheral vision while maintaining a grounded, deliberate stillness. The animal pawed at the ground and nudged near the pack, testing scents, perhaps uncertain whether this strange, upright creature was prey, threat, or something in between. The fog swirled around them in muted waves of gray and white, muffling every sound except the faint breathing of both man and beast. Lucas's muscles burned from tension, but he refused to move, channeling fear into discipline. Finally, a distant seal call drifted across the wind, a faint, almost haunting sound that caught the bear's attention. Its head lifted, ears twitching, the sound awakening older instincts tied to food and territory. The enormous creature hesitated, casting one last glance at the man before stepping backward toward the ridge. It sniffed the air once more, pawed lightly at the snow near the backpack, then turned away, vanishing into the thick fog that had birthed it. Lucas remained crouched, his pulse thundering in his ears, breath shallow but controlled. For a long moment he didn't move, half expecting the animal to return. When silence reclaimed the glacier, he exhaled shakily and looked down at his trembling hands, the ice axe still clutched tight in his grip. His shoulder throbbed from the impact, and blood trickled from the shallow cut along his arm, but the damage was minor. His restraint had spared him far worse. The aftermath was a blur of exhaustion and reflection. He examined the snow around him, deep paw prints, claw marks carved into the ice, and scattered chunks of frost where the bear had stood. The fog began to thin, revealing sharp contours of the glacier under faint sunlight. The landscape had returned to stillness, yet the memory of the encounter clung to every detail. The echo of pause, the weight of silence, the humbling reminder of how small a human truly is in such a place. Later, wildlife specialists explained that Kodiak bears, though immense, can often be deterred when humans stay calm, maintain a non-threatening posture, and make no sudden movements. Lucas's choice to hold his ground, avoid panic, and allow the bear to assess him, as neither prey nor rival had likely saved his life. As the morning brightened, he began his descent toward lower ground, each step measured and deliberate. His muscles still trembled with leftover adrenaline, his body aching from the encounter. The glacier stretched below him, breathtakingly beautiful, but its beauty now carried an edge of fear and reverence. Every echo of ice cracking underfoot reminded him how fragile the balance was between control and chaos, between human endurance and nature's overwhelming power. He paused once more near the edge of the ridge, glancing back toward the fog-shrouded pass where the bear had vanished. The prints were already fading beneath thin layers of drifting snow, erased by the wind as if the encounter had never happened. But the experience would remain carved in his memory, an indelible moment of vulnerability and awe. For Lucas, the lesson was simple but absolute. In wild, untamed places, survival depends not on domination, but on respect. Calm, deliberate action could make the difference between coexistence and catastrophe. The bear had retreated into the mist, but its silent presence lingered, an unseen reminder of the ancient balance that governs the wilderness, where strength alone means nothing without understanding. In the dead of winter 2022, an isolated law enforcement substation near the northern edge of a vast Alaskan wilderness stood like a small, solitary outpost amid the snow-covered expanse, its low brick walls and single-story roof offering the only shelter for miles of frozen forest and icy tundra. Officers Mark Thompson, 42, a veteran of nearly 20 years on the force, and Linda Reyes, 35, an experienced and disciplined patrol officer, were wrapping up a late shift that had stretched into the early hours of the morning. Their bodies were weary from paperwork, vehicle checks, and the constant vigilance required in bear country. The office was quiet except for the low hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of settling walls, a sound that had become almost comforting over months of isolation, until a sudden heavy crash shattered the stillness and jolted both officers upright. The side door, normally reinforced and carefully secured, had been ripped open with brutal force. A massive grizzly bear, drawn by the smell of leftover food stored in the break room and nearby waste bins, loomed in the threshold. Its dark, wet fur glistened under harsh fluorescent lights, and the air seemed to vibrate with the low growl that rumbled from deep within its chest. A sound that resonated through the walls and floor with an almost physical weight. Papers scattered across the linoleum like autumn leaves as the bear lunged at a filing cabinet, its enormous paws rattling drawers and toppling stacks of documents and office equipment. The metallic clatter echoed like gunfire in the confined space. Thompson and Reyes reacted instinctively, diving behind the counter in a desperate attempt to create a barrier between themselves and the immense animal. Adrenaline surged with the realization that they were trapped in a small room with one of the most powerful predators on the continent. The bear's focus was unbroken. Its dark eyes scanned the office with calculating curiosity and unmistakable intent. It lunged again, brushing Thompson's shoulder with terrifying force, leaving deep bruises and sending him stumbling backward against the counter. The impact rattled the barrier, and for a brief moment, he felt the raw weight of the animal's power. The way its strength seemed to press against every surface, threatening to dismantle the room piece by piece. Reyes moved quickly, grabbing a nearby chair and swinging it toward the bear in an attempt to distract it. The bear's paw shot out in a blur, raking across her forearm and tearing through her jacket, leaving painful scratches that burned sharply in the heated air. The next few minutes were chaos. Papers fluttered through the air as cabinets toppled, drawers slammed open, and chairs were hurled aside. The bear tested every surface, overturning objects and searching for food. The officers used sound to their advantage, banging against metal and counters to confuse and intimidate the predator, while trying to keep themselves upright and uncornered. Every movement mattered. One wrong decision could trigger full aggression. Thompson, relying on his experience with wildlife incidents, hurled a flare toward the ceiling. The sudden burst of light and crackle startled the bear, forcing it to recoil briefly before advancing again, its massive shoulders shaking as it reassessed the threat. The bear's claws scraped against the floor and walls, carving deep grooves into linoleum and splintering furniture. Thompson and Reyes moved in coordinated bursts, using whatever they could to keep distance and buy seconds. Thompson's bruised shoulder throbbed, but he stayed focused, shifting a chair to block the animal's path as Reyes retrieved another flare from the supply cabinet. The room felt impossibly small for a creature of such bulk, yet its presence filled every corner, every reflection of the flickering lights. Both officers were drenched in sweat despite the cold, their muscles trembling from strain and fear, yet they knew any lapse could be fatal. After several tense minutes, punctuated by flares, loud banging, and constant repositioning, the bear's focus began to waver. The scent of food it had been drawn to was now mingled with smoke from the flares, sharp noises, and the officer's aggressive defense, creating a confusion that disrupted its behavior. It backed slowly toward the open doorway, paused, sniffed the air, and pawed the floor once more, before turning and retreating into the darkness beyond the substation, back into the frozen wilderness from which it had come. Silence returned gradually, broken only by the crackle of a dying flare and the officer's unsteady breathing. The room was wrecked, papers shredded, furniture damaged, walls gouged, but they were alive. The aftermath was chaotic but survivable. Thompson and Reyes assessed their injuries. Deep bruises along Thompson's shoulder, painful scratches across Reyes's forearm, and the lingering ache of adrenaline fading from their bodies. They inspected the office, noting the deep claw marks, overturned cabinets, and the destroyed break room, a silent testament to the bear's immense strength and determination. Beyond the physical destruction, both felt the psychological weight of what had occurred. How quickly a routine shift had turned into a battle for survival. Authorities later reinforced the substation, installing stronger doors, secure food storage containers, and additional alarms to prevent a similar event. Officials emphasized that food management was critical in areas inhabited by large predators. Wildlife specialists reviewing the case explained that grizzly bears are highly opportunistic, driven by both curiosity and hunger, and that even brief exposure to human food sources can draw them dangerously close to settlements. Defensive tactics, such as barricading, loud noise, and startling devices, can be effective, but must be executed within seconds. For Thompson and Reyes, the encounter left an indelible mark. The memory of claws scraping walls, furniture collapsing under enormous weight, and the sensation of raw power brushing against them remained vivid. The substation, once a mundane workplace, became a symbol of vulnerability and preparedness, a place where quick thinking and training were tested against nature's unpredictability. Even as winter deepened and the forests outside fell silent beneath heavy snow, both officers understood the enduring lesson. In wild country, survival depends on respect. Human control is an illusion. The wilderness always decides how far it will let them go. In March 2021, Eric Johansson, 34, and Sophie Lund, 31, skied into a remote backcountry slope in northern Norway, drawn by the untouched powder blanketing the mountains and the promise of solitude far from crowded resorts. The wind was sharp and relentless, carrying the mingled scent of salt and snow from distant fjords, while the pale winter sun cast long, cold shadows across the undulating terrain. Both were experienced skiers who moved cautiously over ridges and through narrow gullies, pausing to admire the sculpted drifts and ice-laden rocks. Gusts of wind stung exposed skin and lifted powder into ghostly clouds around their boots. The world was silent except for the soft swish of skis on snow and the occasional crack of ice beneath hidden snowpacks. A fragile quiet masking the dangers of the Arctic wilderness. As they rounded a ridge, movement caught Eric's eye, a dark shape against the endless white, shifting with deliberate weight. Before either skier could react, a massive polar bear emerged, its shoulders rising and falling beneath thick white fur streaked with gray. Its black eyes locked on the pair with a focus that sent a surge of fear through both. The bear had likely wandered south from thinning sea ice, driven by hunger and disorientation, and now stood only meters away, sniffing the wind and assessing these strange, upright figures. Time seemed to compress. The skiers froze, heartbeats pounding, breaths forming clouds in the frigid air as the bear lowered its head and began moving toward them with startling speed. Eric reacted first, attempting to ski uphill in a desperate bid for distance. But the bear's size and momentum were overwhelming. Its paw swung in a blur, striking him across the shoulder with bone-crushing force and sending him tumbling into a drift. The cold powder offered only a fleeting cushion before he felt the sharp, searing pain of a broken shoulder, an injury that rendered one arm useless and turned every movement into agony. The bear loomed above him, sniffing and pawing at the snow around him as if confirming that he was prey rather than threat. Sophie raised her ski poles defensively, but the bear lunged again, claws raking across her thigh with brutal precision. The slash tore through layers of clothing and left deep gashes that burned sharply in the cold. She stumbled sideways, pain radiating through her leg, and fought to regain balance on skis slick with loose powder, eyes locked on the predator that showed neither fear nor hesitation, only cold calculation. The open slope offered no protection. There were no trees, no deep snowbanks, only a jagged outcrop several meters uphill. Eric, clutching his damaged shoulder, began limping toward it while Sophie hobbled beside him, leaning on what strength remained. Behind them, the bear pawed the snow, testing and closing the gap with slow, heavy steps. The sound of claws scraping ice echoed through the still air, joined by the crunch of skis and the rasping wind. They reached the outcrop and threw themselves behind the rocks, dropping low to reduce their silhouette. Using ski poles, they struck at the snow and stone, creating sharp, echoing noises meant to confuse or deter the animal. The bear paused, sniffing, its massive head turning from side to side as if considering its next move. Tension stretched unbearably. It pawed at snow, swiped at branches and loose ice, but held its position, attention divided between the two humans and the sense carried by the wind. Eric's shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, and each attempt to shift sent shocks of pain through his body. Sophie's leg burned from the gashes across her thigh, her muscles trembling as she braced against the rocks. The bear remained near, testing the terrain and occasionally shifting stones with casual strength that made the rock under their hands vibrate. Yet it still hesitated, perhaps interpreting their loud, erratic movements as a risk not worth taking. Then, the wind shifted. The air carried a new scent, faint but unmistakable: the distant sea. The bear's focus flickered. It lifted its head, sniffed the air, and turned toward the coastal ridge faintly visible through the thinning fog. For a moment it seemed to weigh its options, then swiped the snow near the skiers one final time before retreating, each deliberate stride sending faint tremors through the frozen ground. Within moments, the white mass disappeared over the ridge, swallowed by the Arctic silence. Only then did Eric and Sophie exhale, collapsing against the rocks, muscles shaking and hearts racing. They understood how close they had come to catastrophe. The injuries were serious. Eric's broken shoulder made even small movements excruciating, and Sophie's lacerations demanded immediate care to prevent blood loss and frostbite. Using their emergency locator beacon, they contacted rescue services, and a helicopter evacuation retrieved them from the backcountry hours later, flying them to a hospital where both underwent treatment. They survived, though recovery would be long and marked by both physical and emotional scars. A permanent reminder of the polar bear's strength and the unpredictable reach of the Arctic's predators. Experts later reviewed the incident, emphasizing that polar bears, though often appearing slow, are capable of astonishing bursts of speed and aggression. In open terrain, Even experienced travelers are at extreme risk if surprised at close range. Wildlife specialists noted that Eric and Sophie's quick reactions, seeking natural cover, maintaining visibility, and generating loud, irregular noise, likely prevented the attack from escalating further. Their experience underscored the importance of vigilance and preparation in polar environments, where thin ice and shifting food patterns increasingly push bears into contact with humans. As the pair recovered, they reflected on the fragile balance between adventure and danger in the Arctic wilderness. For them, the mountains remained breathtaking, but their beauty now carried an undercurrent of unease. Every ridge and drift held memory. The sight of white fur moving through snow, the sound of claws on ice, the cold certainty of vulnerability. In that vast silence, Eric and Sophie learned what few ever experience firsthand: that the Arctic is not a place conquered by skill or endurance, but one that merely allows passage. The wilderness decides who may linger and for how long. In the humid heart of Borneo in early 2025, Lina Rahman, 29, a dedicated wildlife biologist, settled into her small canopy platform high above the rainforest floor. The dense tangle of trees and vines stretched endlessly beneath her and disappeared into the darkness beyond. She had spent months studying the orangutans of the region, observing their routines from elevated positions that offered both safety and the perfect vantage point. That night, as with many before, she had brought supplies in a small wooden crate, fruit for sustenance and research observation, along with delicate equipment for recording behavior. The platform, suspended among massive dipterocarp branches, swayed slightly with the wind and the faint movements of the enormous trees. The night was alive with distant insect calls, the hoot of owls, and the occasional rustle of smaller creatures moving through the undergrowth below. Lina had always considered the height a protective advantage, a barrier against most predators. Yet she respected every sound and shadow in the forest, knowing that even from above, humans were not immune to the intelligence and curiosity of the wildlife around them. Around 1 a.m, she awoke suddenly to a faint scraping sound, the irregular, deliberate rhythm of claws against the wood of her ladder. Her heart surged as she listened, the forest now seeming to hold its breath, every distant call muted against the sharp, calculated noises coming closer. From the darkness below emerged the unmistakable form of a sun bear, its sleek black coat glossy in the slivers of moonlight filtering through the canopy. The small but muscular body moved with surprising dexterity as it climbed the ladder, an agility Lina had never anticipated from a creature of its size. Its short snout sniffed the air as it ascended, and she realized it had detected the scent of fruit stored beside her ladder. This curiosity-driven predator had decided to investigate in a way no human could have fully predicted. The bear reached the platform and paused, sniffing at the crate and pawing the wood with careful yet forceful movements. Lina's breath caught as the crate tipped, spilling bananas and research equipment across the planks. The noise was sharp in the still night, echoing faintly through the surrounding trees. Every instrument and recording device rattled and slid, and for a moment she considered fleeing down the ladder, but instinct held her frozen. Her mind calculated the risk of sudden movement against the unpredictable behavior of the bear. In the confined space of the platform, any rapid motion might provoke an attack, while stillness and measured response could prevent escalation. Clutching a small metal container she used for storing supplies, Lina began banging it loudly against the platform floor. Each clang reverberated through the wood and sent a wave of sound into the surrounding branches. She shouted, projecting as much volume as she could, the combination of noise and sudden movement startling the bear enough to interrupt its immediate interest in the scattered fruit. The bear froze, lifted its massive head, and tilted it to sniff the air, dark eyes glinting with curiosity rather than aggression, yet still radiating the raw intelligence that made even small-bodied bears formidable when encountering humans. For several tense minutes, the sun bear circled the platform, paws scraping the planks and ropes, sniffing the scattered fruit, and testing the crate's edges with careful pressure. Lina remained crouched low, gripping the edge of the platform to steady herself, continuing to bang the metal container intermittently, aware that any lapse in focus could result in the bear reaching for her or her equipment. The animal swiped at ropes, securing the platform, and nudged scattered supplies, investigating every scent and sound without committing to direct aggression. Every moment stretched with excruciating tension. The forest seemed both alive and still, the nocturnal chorus fading as the bear assessed its surroundings and the unusual human presence above. Its movements were methodical and almost contemplative. It sniffed each piece of scattered fruit, pawed at the crate and ropes, and occasionally stepped back to observe Lena's posture. Its intelligence was evident in the way it gauged the platform, the edges, and her reactions. The combination of stealth, curiosity, and climbing skill made the elevated perch far less secure than Lena had assumed, a sobering realization that even a modest canopy shelter could be compromised by a determined predator in pursuit of food. Every squeak of the crate or clang of metal was met with instant assessment by the bear, its ears flicking and claws testing stability with careful pressure. After what felt like hours but was only several minutes, a faint rustle below drew its attention. Perhaps the sound of another nocturnal animal or a shift in the wind carrying a new scent. Whatever it was, the bear's head lifted. It paused, sniffing the air with intense focus. Then, with surprising swiftness for an animal of its size, it descended the ladder, paws finding purchase with calculated dexterity, and vanished into the darkness of the forest floor, leaving behind a platform scattered with bananas, toppled equipment, and the trembling figure of Lena, shaken but unharmed. Once the bear had disappeared, Lena exhaled slowly, her body tense from minutes of high alert, muscles tight, and heart pounding in the quiet aftermath. She inspected the platform. The crate was overturned, bananas lay scattered across the planks, and some of her research equipment had slid dangerously close to the edge. Nothing was broken beyond minor scratches. Her mind replayed the encounter, analyzing the bear's agility, the deliberate pacing of its movements, and the way it had assessed threats without committing to attack, an intelligence and caution that made even a relatively small bear capable of causing serious harm if provoked. Lena realized her assumptions about safety in elevated positions needed reevaluation. The sun bear had shown that climbing skill, curiosity, and opportunism could render traditional canopy shelters vulnerable, and that even careful precautions, such as storing supplies beside the ladder, could not fully prevent contact. She resolved to reinforce future platforms with more secure storage, maintain stricter vigilance at night, and develop strategies for deterring climbing animals without risking harm to herself or the wildlife. By dawn, Lena had regained composure, reorganized her platform, and carefully cataloged the scattered supplies. The bear had vanished into the dense jungle, leaving only footprints and broken foliage as evidence of its visit. Her respect for the species and understanding of its capabilities had deepened immeasurably, a lasting reminder that in Borneo, survival often depends on composure, quick assessment, and calm, deliberate action in the face of an unexpected, agile, and intelligent predator.